Dr. Saunders is a professing Christian, specifically a Lutheran. And as such, and his book very clearly bears this out, he has a very clear view of what the Bible teaches about fallen human nature, fallen in sin and living in a sinful world. He understands the proper distinction between the law and the gospel, and what we Lutherans call, going back to Martin Luther, a theology of glory versus the theology of the cross, and how those two very differing approaches to viewing life and living with the problems of living in a fallen world come up with some very different viewpoints and answers to why do people suffer from mental illness. He's going to talk about all these things with us this morning. As the flyer explains, there will be it'll be a two-part presentation, each one roughly an hour. And with that introduction, we'll turn it over to Dr. Saunders.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Thank you. Welcome. Delighted to see the turnout this morning. As this does indicate, I am a professor at Marquette. I'll be starting my 22nd year there in the fall. And I've done a lot of lectures, and just, you know, if you wouldn't mind, just to help me feel a little bit more at home, every other one of you, if you could struggle to stay awake, and the other half, do something with your phone. We can dim the lights, you know, that way I can see your face lit up by your phone. That way I'll feel much more comfortable. The talk is about mental illness. It is based on, as Kurt said, a recently published book. And I want to start with two stories, one about Nick, my nephew, and one about Aunt Lisa, a young lady that I know. Nick recently lost his father, who struggled with cancer for 5 years, fought it for 5 years. Nick is now 18, senior, just graduated from high school. Very good soccer player. And so 5-year struggle with cancer, if any of you have ever witnessed that, maybe even going through it yourself, it's brutal. Cancer doesn't give in. There's chemo, there's radiation, there's pain, there's sleeplessness, so 18 minus 5 years, 13. Recently died, actually the week after Nick graduated. Soccer player, really good soccer player, came off the field early in his senior year, fall semester, first semester during the soccer season, and swore at his teammates that they weren't doing effing, they're not playing effing hard enough. His coach suspended him 2 games and took him out of the starting lineup for the rest of the season. Annalisa, also in high school, treated for depression, had to miss a few weeks of school, went back to school, and met with the principal, who talked about her hospitalization, somehow never mentioned the word depression. Was asked to talk to the school counselor, who also somehow, practically miraculously, never mentioned the word depression. When she brought it up, she was told, well, you know, our faith makes us stronger. And just you know, get your work done, and rely on your faith. Pray to God to make your faith stronger. Because we don't want people to know you were depressed, was the impression that she got. And of course, depression, not unlike cancer, doesn't give. There are people that recover from depression, but probably most people struggle with it. Actually, the statistics say about half of people with depression, it's sort of like diabetes, which I have. It turns into a chronic disease, something that you always have to manage. Some people, the other half, are lucky. They have experienced an episode of depression. They recover from it, and it might come back. They might have another episode, but the episodes are limited, and essentially they're able to live depression-free. So it's about half and half. But Annalisa experienced depression about a year later, and of course, she didn't tell anyone at her school. At her Lutheran school, at her Lutheran high school, because she figured it wouldn't help. It wouldn't matter. She dealt with it on her own. The moral of the stories, it's extremely important that we recognize mental health problems so that we can respond in a way that is compassionate, you can put in parentheses there, Christian, and helpful. Otherwise, people continue to suffer. Otherwise, and I've met people like this, otherwise people might lose their faith. Why is God doing this to me? A kind God wouldn't do this. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with God. And of course, many people confuse the church, which is full of sinful human beings, and is far from perfect, with God. So the way the church treats them, they figure, well, this is how God is treating me. Unfortunately. Normally, naturally, I have a brother-in-law who's a pastor, and one of the 6-year-olds would leave church, and ever so often would look up to him as he's walking by, shaking hands. Every so often he'd stop and say, "Hey, Jesus, I got a question for you." And Rolf is my brother-in-law's name. Never corrected him because not entirely incorrect. So, but of course, again, the church is full of sinful, flawed human beings and represent God, but of course, God is entirely compassionate, loving, caring. The church isn't always, and so people might lose their faith. People have lost their faith. Particular issue with one of the topics covered in the book with regard to child abuse and domestic violence, feeling like the church hasn't helped them is a big issue. So we're going to have 2 parts to this presentation. Give you some basic information about mental illness. What is it? What is mental health? What is mental illness? How common is it? How bad is it? Kind of a strange question, but really, how bad is it? Is it really all that bad? And then have hopefully some time for some questions and answers. Take a short break. Come back at 11 for part 2, where we'll address how we can help. How we can help by understanding the value of treatment. I'll summarize that part in case we need to hurry. Treatment works, but you got to find the right treatment. Treatment works, so understand the value of treatment. Understand what stops people from seeking treatment. I told you a little bit, I hinted a little bit at that with the story about Annalisa. How we can help is to adopt a proper Christian understanding of mental illness. And then specific helpful things that you and your church can do. And again, hopefully some time for some questions and answers. Starting with the first part, what is mental illness? What is mental health? I summarize human beings, I summarize life sort of, as the ABCs and the 2 R's. ABCs means affect, behavior, cognition. Affect. Sometimes you'll hear depression referred to as the affective disorder, one of the affective disorders. That's what that's getting at. Affect is feeling. Currently, so psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, we distinguish affect as moment to moment how I'm feeling. Mood is affect over time. So you'll also hear depression referred to as a mood disorder. It's a mood disorder because the affect is persistently low. So affect is the way we feel. Behavior is what we do, how we act, how we behave. Cognitions is everything that goes on in our heads. It's what we remember. It's what we anticipate. It's what we plan. It's what we think. It's how we internally react to how someone is talking to us, to how someone is approaching us. Affect or cognitions, thoughts. So ABT doesn't quite work as well, or FBT, not at all. ABC, affect, feelings. Behavior, cognitions, the way we think. And the two R's, relationships and roles. Who we are to other people. Our relationship with essential others in our lives, our family members, my wife, my children, my mother, my brothers, my friends, my co-workers. These are the relationships in my life. You have relationships in your life. You have roles in your life. I used to have a role as a student, not anymore, although I like to think I'm a student always. Now I'm a professor, a teacher. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I do clinical work. Most important of all is that I'm a husband and a father. I'm also a son and a brother. These are my roles in life. You have roles in life. These are obligations that we have to other people. These are things we do for other people. Roles and relationships are clearly associated with each other, although they're also independent. I can be a good worker and a lousy coworker. I can get my job done and be nasty to other people. Maybe you've worked with that person. The ABCs affect each other. And it's important to recognize these are double arrows. And this is, I'm going to give you in the next 3 minutes, the summary of what mental health professionals do. So you can skip grad school and just go right out there and start to help you. This will sound familiar to you, though. The way we feel affects how we act and what we think. How we behave affects how we feel and what we think. What we think affects how we feel and how we behave. The reason I prepared for this morning is so that when I came here, I could think to myself, I'm prepared. So that I would feel a little bit less nervous, which is if I'm nervous, that's going to affect how I do up here. Unlike most mornings, I did not have anything to drink this morning. That's a joke. If I had something to drink, that would have affected how I felt, what I'm thinking. All of us have gone through periods in our life where we haven't had enough time to do fun things. Been too busy to maybe exercise, get out for your usual walk, even too busy to have conversations with friends. One of the most important treatments for depression is to tell people, go do fun things. It is actually sort of the title of many books on the treatment of depression, which take the behavioral perspective. Go do more fun things. I'll ask people who are depressed when I'm seeing them, when's the last time you did something fun? Well, I watched TV yesterday. I don't count. Friday, I did my laundry. Okay, anything else? It's a rhetorical question because I already know their answer, because when they're that depressed, because depression takes away our motivation to do fun things. When we're depressed, and sometimes depression does come in and of itself, right? There's a lot of biological influence, biological determinants of depression. Some people are kind of born more depressed than others. A lot of people are born more anxious than others. That would be, I'm one of them. My son is one of them. Some people, so we're born with a tendency towards a certain feelings. Other people are just naturally relaxed, naturally happy. Nick's youngest brother, Tyler, at his dad's funeral. Not smiling, but you can't make that little kid unhappy. He's 12. He's going to be fine. He's naturally really happy. I hate that little kid. He's just like his dad. Just a happy kid. And he always wants to do things, and you ask him things, and he just has a pleasant, cheerful response. So these things affect each other. And go do fun things. It'll make you feel better. And when you feel better, you think better. Want to feel bad? Go get the flu. It just naturally makes you feel better. And you say to yourself, oh, it's just let's end this. Oh, you say this to yourself, and you don't want to do much, and etc. The ABCs affect each other. And so as psychologists, we focus a lot on what people are doing, go do fun things, but we also focus a great deal on what they're thinking. Real quick example, someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a combat veteran, comes back from combat, comes back from the European theater from World War II, comes back from Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, whatever it is, and witness their buddies die, and they live, and they think, I shouldn't be alive. They think, I didn't do something right. They think, I was in charge. I was the platoon leader. It's my fault that he died. And what psychologists do is say, well, was it really? This is what you're saying to yourself, and you feel terrible as a result. But this is what you're saying to yourself, but is it true? A person with depression will say to herself over and over, nobody likes me. Was that really true? Because you were just talking about going out with your friends, but they don't really like me. And what about your boyfriend? Well, he just feels sorry for me. No, I've met boyfriends. That's not how they act. They don't date people that they feel sorry for. We change the way people think so that we can change the way they feel. We encourage them to engage in better behaviors. Sometimes we teach them behaviors to help them how they feel, and etc. So affect, behavior, cognitions, affect, have an effect on, these happen within the person, and all of these have an effect on roles and relationships. The guy who tells himself over and over again, I can't do this, that's me on the golf course, I don't know what I'm doing out here, making a fool of myself, these people don't know me, I hope I don't kill anyone with my errant shot. That's going to make me feel nervous and make me not do so well. It's going to affect how well I do in my role as golfer. As teacher, I want to be prepared. So I'm not so nervous. Person with depression has problems with roles. Doesn't feel the love of friends and family. Doesn't do as well in roles because of the depression, because of the anxiety, because of the mental illness. So mental health means that a person feels much the way she wants to, is in control of his actions, and thinks both realistically but also optimistically. Both realistically and optimistically. And as a result, the person is able to fulfill obligations to others, roles, and is able to make and keep important relationships, doesn't shy away from relationships, expecting this person to not like me either. We've probably all heard of the classic example, maybe you've seen it with you've experienced it, seen it in your kids as they're trying to date. As the couple gets closer, one of them starts to back away out of fear. You get too close to me, you're going to find out what I'm really like. You're going to realize that I'm unlovable. Mentally healthy people, the way they think, the way they feel, the way they act, helps them maintain good relationships, helps them in their roles as student, as teacher, as worker, and etc. In contrast, a person with mental illness feels badly and is not in control of his actions, or maybe one or the other, and thinks unrealistically. Might be a problem with affect, might be a problem with behavior, might be a problem with cognitions, might be a problem with two of those three, all three. And obviously that would determine the severity of the mental illness. And as a result, the person experiences a lot of distress. It's sounds like a foolish thing to say, but people with depression experience a lot of moment-to-moment distress. A person with phobias, fears, anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, they feel a lot of distress. They're constantly anxious, worried. So as a result of the way they are acting or feeling or thinking, they experience a lot of distress. And maybe, but it's also or, the person has difficulties in obligations to others or with relationships. The middle and is most important. The middle and is most important. Someone might think badly, might feel badly, might be doing things that kind of are unhealthy, but as long as it's not causing problems, the person doesn't meet criteria for mental illness. I'm going to summarize this slide. As a psychologist, I often get asked, not often, but sometimes asked, well, how do you know if a person has a drinking problem? How do you know if a person has a drinking problem? After all, the French drink a lot, and their rate of alcoholism is actually one of the lowest in the world. Good point. That's exactly right. So the behavior of drinking in and of itself is not a problem. So how do you know if you have a drinking problem? And my response is, if drinking causes a problem, then you have a drinking problem. If the behavior of drinking is causing the person to feel distress, which is unlikely, but if the drinking is causing the person to have problems in relationships, or problems as a worker, or they get arrested, or they go to the doctor and the doctor says, your liver is really not in good shape, that would be an example of impairment of self-care. Then you have a drinking problem. How common is mental illness? We have done epidemiological surveys. Epidemiology is the study of epidemics. Epidemics are a disease within a population. We have the epidemiological catchment area survey, which was done in the 1980s. Daryl Regier, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod member, was the lead scientist for the ECA study. The National Comorbidity Study was done after that in the 1990s. These are epidemiological surveys. The ECA, they selected 7 catchment areas. These are basically the cities within which 7 different universities were located. Duke University was one of them, UCLA, I believe Yale was one of them. I know Yale was one of them. I'm blocking on the several others. But they did the similar survey. The National Comorbidity Survey was a national sample of about 9,000 people, randomly selected. What they did was they would go to, they trained researchers, they trained interviewers to go to homes, apartment buildings, homes. Knock on the door. This person would answer, say, is so-and-so home? Yes, that person would come and say, hi, I'm from the National Institute of Mental Health, and I'd like to interview you for the next 3 hours about your mental health. Right? I know, right? My response would have been 80% said yes. Sometimes they said, well, I don't have time today. Well, would you be available to do this tomorrow? Or we can come back a couple of days from now. 80% response rate. And then they would ask them questions, and these were what are called structured interviews. So when I do interviews with new patients, I say, hey, what brings you in? Tell me more about that. You said that you're having problems with your marriage. How long have you been married? Unstructured. I just kind of follow along with where the conversation goes. A structured interview is written down. It says, okay, the first question has to do with your mood. In the last week, have you had problems with your mood where it has been very low most days of the week, most of the time? The person says, no. How about in the past month? Have you had a problem with your mood? What about in the past year? So you said in the past month your mood has been quite low. During that time, were you having trouble sleeping? During that time, were you having appetite problems? Whether you're eating too much or eating too little? During that time, did you have low self-esteem? And answer all of these questions, and then you move on to bipolar disorder, what we used to call manic depression. Has there ever been a time when you had trouble sleeping, when you had more energy, that people noticed that you were irritable, that you were spending money inappropriately, and so forth and so on? 2 to 2.5 to 3 hour interview, structured interview. And the interviewer would write down the person's response, yes, no, yes, no. And then they would go home and enter into their computer, yes, no, send the information off to Duke or wherever, and the computer would decide whether the person met criteria for mental illness. That's how these surveys were done. Very scientific, very reliable. They've done, the World Health Organization has done a similar survey around the world, and these are the results. The ECA study, this is right out of the book, the ECA prevalence, the NCS prevalence. This is 1 year prevalence. In the last year, has this happened to you? So there's kind of 3 questions. In the last month, did this happen? How about the last year? How about ever in your lifetime? Any questions about that?
If you're doing a sampling and someone's really depressed, are they even going to answer their door?
Maybe not, but they were very persistent. I think they went back as often as 5 times to ask someone. And the short answer is probably yes, most probably yes. Someone who is so depressed that they're not even answering their door, not that typical. Most people with depression force themselves out of bed, force themselves to eat, force themselves to get their kids off to school, force themselves to go to work, and etc. So they do remain functional. They also have they're not as efficient as they would be. They're very distressed. They go home, they're exhausted, and they spend the rest of the day in bed crying, and etc. So, but yes. So based on this, and you can see that from these 2 columns that the results were pretty similar. About 1 in 5 persons in any 12-month period will experience a diagnosable mental illness. 1 in 5, 20%. The anxiety disorders are the most common mental illnesses. So any anxiety disorder. They list bipolar disorder and major depression together under the mood disorders. And any mood disorder, it's about 7%. You'll see figures on the internet and various things anywhere from 4 to 10%. But best results, so 1 in 10 for the NCS, the best estimate, and this is not my summary, it's not the average obviously, but the best guess, it's about 7 to 8% of all people will have a depression in a given year. The National Comorbidity Survey didn't ask about alcohol or drug use problems, but it's about 10% according to the ECA study. Other surveys have confirmed that. Schizophrenia, about 1 in 100 people. Bipolar disorder, about 1 in 100 people. Severe cognitive impairment, what we used to call mental retardation, about 1 in 100 people. Severe depression, the kind that you were describing, severe depression, about 1 in 100 people. The surveys didn't include eating disorders, didn't include some of the other disorders, did not include domestic violence, did not include child abuse and neglect, did not include elder abuse and neglect. Why not? Because going in, they knew people would lie about these things. So we're not going to even bother asking. How bad is it? How bad is it? Well, intensely and immensely bad. Just, if we stop with this part of it, distress to the family and personal distress. Distress to the family, and some of you here know this firsthand. You know, worried about going to work because what your husband might do when you're gone. That he might make another suicide attempt. Worried about having people over because your child with autism might get upset. So let's just not do that. Worried about accepting an invitation to go to another person's party because you might not be able to leave because your daughter, you can't leave her alone. There's the shame and embarrassment related to mental illness, which we still have, despite lots of efforts to change this. There's still a lot of shame and embarrassment. We're going to talk a lot about that in the second part of this talk. Shame and embarrassment to the person as well. But this is family only. What about the person with the mental illness? Well, they're emotionally distressed. They're physically distressed. Mental illness is exhausting. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to answer the door. You don't feel like eating. When you do eat, the food is flavorless. You don't feel like going out. Cognitive distress. Thinking this is never going to end. Thinking, why do I deserve this? Shame and embarrassment as well. Disability and impairment at work. This is the literal cost of mental illness. The literal cost of mental illness has been estimated in the tens of billions of dollars a year in lost productivity. That's if the person with mental illness can even get a job. An employer, a potential employer finds out they have mental illness, we decided to go with this other candidate. So less employment, lower employment, less income, greater levels of poverty. Same effect to the family as well. Relationship impairment. Sort of by definition, disability or impairment at work, disability or impairment with relationships, that sort of defines mental illness. Not sort of, it does define mental illness. Impaired relationships with others, impaired relationships within the family. I have this lovely couple. I was seeing their son for treatment about 10 years ago. 5 years ago, I got an email from the dad saying, I don't know if you saw the obituary about Michael. This is about a year after Michael had committed suicide. They agreed to come in to talk to my class about what it is like to be in the awful position, the uniquely terrible social position of having someone you love commit suicide. And so I interviewed them in front of my class. And again, this lovely couple. And at one point, you know, and this was 6 years after the death of their son. And they're talking, kind of both of them, just sort of, you know, talking to me, to each other. At one point he said, you know, I blame you for Michael's death. And she said, yeah, I blame you as well. Compared relationships within the family. They'd gotten past that. But that's a big part of what you might deal with. Exacerbation of medical problems. Persons with mental illness are more likely to have medical problems. They don't eat as well, they don't get as good sleep. Persons with medical problems very commonly depressed, diabetes, cancer, other chronic heart disease, other chronic illnesses, highly comorbid. Comorbid means morbidity is illness, mortality is death, so we talk about morbidity and mortality. Comorbid means also have this other disease. You have this disease, but also co-occurring another disease. So comorbid mental illness with these severe medical illnesses or chronic medical illnesses, very great. Even more problematic, person dealing with diabetes who's depressed, a person dealing with cancer who is extremely anxious, doesn't deal with it as well. Of course, suicide might be the ultimate cause of mental illness. Mental illness is one of the lead risk factors for suicide. And faith-related, spiritual-related problems. Mentioned some of them earlier. Doubts about, okay, maybe God exists, but this idea that he's a loving God. I'm going through this, and I'm supposed to believe that God is loving. Maybe he loves, but he doesn't love me. Maybe there's no God at all. So in summary, you know many people with mental illness, and those people are suffering. In a church with 500 members, about 100 people will experience mental illness in any given year. And they're not living by themselves, by the way. They're living within a family. A family of 5 persons, now this is statistically inappropriate to do this, but a family with 5 persons in it, we can expect one of them to have mental illness. This doesn't quite work like that, but it's hard to imagine that a church, you know, the idea that church protects from mental illness, it does, relatively. Instead of 20% in churches, it's maybe 18%. That's still about 1 in 5. Probably every family is affected by mental illness. And by the way, they also asked about lifetime prevalence. Has this ever happened in your lifetime? Have you ever had a period of time when you were depressed, when you were highly anxious, when you were drinking too much, when you had this problem? And it's basically double the rate for a lifetime, which means, by the way, the good news of that is people develop a mental illness, they get over it. Yes, I had it in the past, but I don't have it now. Yes.
I just want to clarify with the 2 bullets there. When you say about 100 will experience mental illness, that means personally that they have had it, rather
Yes.
than a family member
That's correct.
being the one with them, near them.
Right. So family rates, I've never actually seen stats on family rates, but it would have to be, what, 75% 3 out of 4 families? Maybe, you know, so again, you know, the single members, you know, living by themselves in your church. But if it's a family, I mean, and so they're there. So who are they? Don't feel ashamed that you don't know. But just to point out, you don't. You don't know who they are because they have not told you. We'll talk about this in the second hour. They have not told you because they're afraid to tell you. Because they're embarrassed. They're afraid. So I distinguish embarrassment, which is doing something in front of other people, oh, I'm embarrassed, from shame, which is me. I'm ashamed of myself. They both operate. I don't want other people to know. I don't even want to acknowledge it to myself. And a lot don't. All related, of course, to the stigma of mental illness. Perhaps related to, as Kurt previewed, perhaps related to the theology of glory, which is a particular issue for Christians and Americans in general. Just work hard, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, which I've owned boots. I still don't know what a bootstrap is, but it's apparently a thing you pull yourself up by. You know, put your nose to the grindstone. You know, you be what you can be what you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. Right? That's an American thing. And the theology of glory is not American. It goes all the way back to St. Paul, as we'll see.